on a cold, snowy December 31st, 1975. Inside a quiet Indiana home, 18-year-old Sarah Cindy White crouched beside the Roberson family's Christmas tree. Asleep in their bedrooms were Charles and Carol Roberson and their 4 young children, Michael, Dale, Gary, and Rita. According to her own later account, White struck a match and intentionally set the tree on fire. Her stated purpose was not murder, but to create a smokescreen, a desperate plan to force an evacuation of the household so she could finally escape what she described as a terrifyingly abusive and captive situation within those very walls. The fire did not behave as she had anticipated. It spread with a rapid and violent intensity, quickly engulfing the room. White claimed she immediately ran to alert Charles Roberson, screaming that the house was on fire. A chaotic and doomed attempt to escape followed. White described a scene of thick, choking smoke and panic as they tried to shepherd the children to a bedroom window. She recounted Carol Roberson instructing her to open the high window to pass the children to safety outside. White stated she climbed onto a top bunk bed to reach it. Her memory of the events then fractures. The last thing she recalls is struggling with the window latch before finding herself lying in the frozen ground outside, disoriented by the sirens and lights. The outcome was absolute devastation. The entire Roberson family, Charles, Carol, Michael, Dale, Gary, and Rita, perished inside the home, victims of smoke inhalation and the flames. Cindy White alone was found outside, the miraculous and solitary survivor of a horror she herself had ignited. Cindy White's early life was marked by significant adversity, which provides context for her psychological state at the time of the incident. She is described experiencing substantial childhood trauma within her family environment, beginning around the age of 8. White has characterized this period as involving a troubling shift in her relationship with her father that created a climate of secrecy. These early experiences reportedly led to the development of unusual coping strategies. To avoid returning to her family home on weekends, she would sometimes simulate fainting spells or stage minor accidents. On one documented occasion, this behavior resulted in a diagnosed condition where she experienced temporary loss of sensation in her leg, understood to be psychosomatic in nature. Her psychological state continued to present challenges, ultimately leading to a 10-month period of institutional care at a psychiatric facility when she was 16 years old. During this time, clinicians documented a condition where psychological distress manifested as physical symptoms. Most significantly for her later credibility, professional evaluations noted she demonstrated patterns of communication characterized by elaboration and narrative inconsistency. These patterns were understood as defensive mechanisms developed to manage difficult circumstances. This early history of psychological challenges and documented communication patterns would later become central to evaluating her account of subsequent events. Cindy White's relationship with the Roberson family was complex and is now the subject of intense dispute. Initially, they represented a safe haven. She met them as a child on her paper route, and they became a stabilizing force in her life. She babysat their 4 young children, and a genuine, loving bond developed. She described the children running to her with the joy of puppies. When she was released from the psychiatric hospital at age 18, it was to their home that she moved. White's narrative then darkens significantly. She alleges that shortly after her arrival, Charles and Carol Roberson transformed from benefactors into abusers. Her claims are extreme, being forced to watch pornography with them, being coerced into performing in and filming pornographic acts with Carol, and suffering terrifying threats from Charles. She recounts one specific incident where he decapitated the family kitten in front of her and the screaming children to demonstrate what would happen if she disobeyed. She further alleges he threatened to murder her 4-year-old sister if she ever tried to run away. These claims, made years after the deaths of the Robersons, are impossible for the victims to refute. Investigators did uncover sexually charged letters exchanged between White and Charles Roberson, which they interpreted as evidence of a consensual affair. In these letters, White writes of wishing to have him all to herself, and he notes she is now of legal age. Crucially, no evidence beyond White's own word has ever been found to corroborate her later allegations of captivity and sexual abuse. This lack of corroboration, combined with her documented history of distortion, has led many to view these claims as a calculated narrative developed after the fact. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, Cindy White's story was one of tragic accident. She presented herself as the sole, miraculous survivor of a devastating Christmas tree blaze. This account quickly unraveled when arson investigators discovered evidence of an accelerant at the scene, proving the fire had been intentionally set. This finding led to her arrest and charge for the murder of all 6 members of the Roberson family. Her 1977 trial was dominated by the issue of her credibility. 3 separate psychiatrists took the stand, all testifying that White was a pathological liar. This diagnosis, stemming from her childhood assessments, severely damaged her defense. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison. For the first decade of her incarceration, White maintained her complete innocence, clinging to the accidental fire story. Then, in a dramatic shift, approximately 10 years into her sentence, she confessed. She admitted to intentionally setting the fire, but maintained her revised narrative. It was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to escape abuse, and never intended to kill anyone. She explained her initial decade of denial as a product of deep shame and a misguided hope that she could still win freedom by blaming the accident on the Christmas tree. She stated she finally confessed because she could no longer keep her web of lies straight. This confession, while admitting to the act, created a new layer of contradiction. It forced the legal system and the public to reconcile an admitted killer's claims of victimhood with a well-documented history of fabrication. Behind bars, Cindy White's life has been a study in contrasts. On one hand, she has pursued rehabilitation with notable dedication. She earned her GED, completed 4 semesters of college, and became a licensed cosmetologist. She acquired certifications in health occupations, accounting, and business math. She learned sign language and took on the role of tutoring deaf inmates. Furthermore, she has regularly participated in therapeutic programs, attending groups for incest survivors, grief, and anger management. She describes these actions as genuine acts of contrition and a way to make a positive difference for others, stating she wishes she had died instead of the children. Contrasting this image of rehabilitation is her relentless, 5-decade-long campaign for freedom. By her own admission, she has filed a lot of appeals and petitions for clemency. At least 10 are documented between 1978 and 2016. This persistence is viewed skeptically by prosecutors like Lance Hamner, who has opposed her release for decades. From his perspective, her efforts to get out undermine her expressions of remorse. He argues that setting a fire knowing a family is asleep inside is an unforgivable act, and that her claims of abuse are a convenient fiction crafted after the fact to garner sympathy. He states that his duty is to speak for the dead victims who cannot speak for themselves. And from that vantage point, clemency is not justified, regardless of her accomplishments in prison. The case of Cindy White ultimately hinges on an unresolved and perhaps unresolvable question. Can she be believed? She herself confronts this, stating, "I have no reason to lie right now. I have nothing. I'm doing life." This plea for belief is perpetually weighed against the definitive psychiatric diagnosis of her as a pathological liar and her own admission of lying for a decade about the fire itself. The prosecution's stance is that her horrific allegations against the Robersons are a strategic narrative, developed only after the only people who could refute them were dead. She is a living paradox. She expresses profound, seemingly genuine remorse, saying she would give her own life to bring the children back, and that anyone else who committed such an act should forfeit their freedom forever. Yet for 50 years, she has simultaneously fought to regain her own freedom. This contradiction is perhaps best captured in her own conflicted answer to the final revealing question. When asked if she would free herself, she does not give a simple yes or no. Instead, she offers a fractured response that encapsulates the entire tragedy. That's a good question. A part of me wants to say yes, and a part of me wants to say no, because I don't deserve it.